Good evening and welcome to a new edition of To The Point. This evening we'll be discussing Egyptian Prime Minister's visit to the United Nations. Prime Minister Sameh Shoukry, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry headed to New York yesterday, and he is now in the United Nations, where he will be heading the Egyptian delegation in a committee to discuss the ideological discourse of terrorist organizations, among so many other things. Worth noting, the president will be holding, the foreign minister rather, will be holding a number of bilateral meetings. This evening with a distinguished panel, we'll be discussing Egypt heading the UN Security Council. What can we actually achieve? With us this evening is His Excellency Ambassador Nabil Badr, who is the chairman of the Egyptian United Nations Association, and worth noting, he was the former advisor to the Egyptian foreign minister. A pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
The fact that we're heading the UN Security Council this month of May, can we achieve something tangible? And when I say tangible, I mean beyond condemnation, beyond some kind of a resolution or something on paper which will not develop beyond the paper.
We have to give it a serious trial. It's not easy, but we have to work hard there. Well, we are speaking about an agenda which is full of certain items, and being the president of the Security Council, we can sort of fix the agenda, and looks like as well we have another hat which has to do with the Council for Anti-Terrorism and how to work on that. Now, this is the wider umbrella in which Minister Shoukry certainly is going to tackle throughout his visit to New York. Now, his visit demonstrates, number one, the importance of being in the Security Council at that juncture, that the agenda actually from the Egyptian point of view is full of hot spots. Three, that it ranges from the regional to the international scene as well. Four, that many of the files that are being treated in the United Nations and have gone in phases up to this moment do need more solid resolutions. You actually whetted my appetite technically and politically when you mentioned that Minister Shoukry is going to talk about the anti-terrorist moves and what we can do here in that. I think in particular Egypt is highly qualified to talk about this subject. You spoke about the ideological elements. We are equally interested in the ideological elements. In other words, there are lots of factors involved here. These factors, if I might say, do extend from the 90s of the last century, when there were outspoken demands about what civilization, whether we're going to clash, whether we're going to be friends, and actually some of the prominent thinkers and professors try to do something about that. They try to solidify their views in theories or in lectures or in essays. One of them, of course, a very well-known figure was Samuel Huntington from Harvard, but so were as well certain heads of states, like, for instance, Muhammad Khatami of Iran, who sponsored the dialogue among ancient civilizations. It so happened I headed the Egyptian delegation on that occasion. But I'm going to go beyond that to look of the whole thing. Problem is, we speak, and this is one of the United Nations principles, tolerance, co-living, mutual respect, religious freedom, how to provide human rights to everybody and to secure that as well, and how to cooperate internationally. Now, lots of these are big, big words used very nicely in the media. But when you come to the real progress, it differs from one factor to another. Sometimes it has to do with the actual implementation, the political will, which can help a country to implement that meticulously. In other cases, there are exceptional circumstances, but of course they are not going to last forever. A third factor is when regrettably, and this is once more I refer to the word dogmatic which you mentioned, when that is tied up by trying to impose a certain dogma, a certain philosophy, which might be used to justify why this should be hard, should be a killer, should have no tolerance, should be cruel, etc., etc. Now, this exists at different and varying stages between the two parts. On the one side, when we talk about the domain of our part of the world, the Middle East, regrettably we find that those that have exploited and done a lot of injury to the image of Islam are such people who sponsor up to this moment that, well, they're going around fighting, killing, causing problems, dividing the world or our part of the world, and being actually, according to many sources, well, toys and games in the hands of foreign and anti-nationalistic authorities in this country themselves. When you look at the same time, and I hate in that juncture to say East and West and these words, when you look to other parts, you find that some theoreticians have tried to justify their look by looking down on other civilizations, on other cultures, and regrettably some of them, in spite of their brilliant academic records, have tried to tie this vision to some extent by an ideology which says, all right, we're sitting on top of the world because we belong to what they call the Western civilization. Huntington did that, and that we believe in the Greek tradition, history, democracy, etc., etc., etc. And then he comes to call others the green danger, referring to Muslims or Islam, or that he speaks to his readers and says, well, they should keep a good eye on the followers of Confucius, China, etc., etc. Now, this in itself is not dogmatic, is not scientific, is not correct, simply because to assume or try to sell that that sort of implementation of what he thinks is the reason of the superiority of that civilization is not correct at all. It's like trying to photocopy, make a Xerox copy of something and compare whatever to that. That's not correct. Number two, demonstrates a regrettable lack of understanding, adequate study to the others. Three, does not really help feed the spirit of real tolerance, of real cooperation. Now, in the United Nations, that should take a step forward. The United Nations has demonstrated at the start of that century, I remember when we worked, we got a resolution from the General Assembly to follow up the dialogue among civilization, etc., but that faded down. Now, what we need, I think, is a political will.
Can we revive this right now? Do you think the environment is conducive to reviving this?
I think, and that's a personal view, that Egypt is qualified to do that.
But Egypt cannot do it alone. Do you see that the environment, the overall environment is conducive to that?
Well, I'll answer that. Now, when I speak about Egypt, I say that Egypt, why? Why Egypt? The historical background the history, which is long, the spirit of tolerance which has prevailed. Well, of course, there are certain exceptions to that. At the same time, the very solid inherent interest in promoting that, because we think it is conducive to peace, and we need peace, all right? So, and we have cooperated in projects of that dialogue on lots of levels. I mentioned one of them. I had a chance to participate in others as well. And we have done that on levels of culture, civilization, also religious, and etc., etc. Now, I think Egypt can ask all the parties concerned, those that need to correct the dogma and to work hard at it, and that concerns lots of countries in this part of the world and that belong to the Islamic creed, etc., etc. But to invite all others to retreat from the traditional vision of that we are superior because we have that and we belong that, and you cannot be like that because you are different, because this is against the very essence and the basic philosophy of civilization or dialogue. Now, is that conducive to promotion of peace, of promoting what you have talked about trying to relax the dogmatic frustrations? I think yes. That's number one. Number two, we should put a good case here because we need it, and we suffer from terrorism partly because of that dogmatic sort of situation. And number three, to give it a push, a political push, hopefully the United Nations can sponsor to have the political will as a solid backing to that initiative. Why? Timing is good because the whole world suffers from terrorism, from its consequences, and part of it, all the world speaks about the tragedy of the dogmatic or misusing the dogma to promote an ongoing terrorism. That's one element. Second element is to solve the hot fires that do contribute up to this moment to the continuation of strife, of wars. From an Egyptian angle, living in this part of the world, we find the consequences of the aftermath of the revolution which took place, demonstrated, for instance, in Libya, in some faction that do belong to that ideological faction, this or that, as you know. At the same time, you need a strong security force to bring about peace and security to that country. You cannot do that.
But if we take a look at the supposed ideologies, because the publicized ideologies of ISIS or Daesh or the Brotherhood or whatever, I mean, this is all even using religion really is a pretext. The question is, do we have, and can Egypt push forth some kind of a formula whereby those who nurture, who finance, who support, who harbor such groups will be put to trial even?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem that we, as a world at large, that we even agree to who qualifies under the title terrorist or terrorism.
Okay.
Can Egypt push that?
Yes, of course, we have to. Well, to use probably another term, if I might, we must find the ways and means of doing it. That's the essence probably of what I understood from what you said. In other words, if we spoke about the dogmatic strife and how to really stop the path before it and to stop it once and for all, we have at the same time to look into the international scene. There is no unified sort of approach towards recognizing which faction's thinking can lead to that terrorism and which cannot. And you know, in our case, for instance, we have some factions, and Egypt has talked about that times and times again, that try to sell themselves as being only an opposition, whatever. This is not true. They try to bring about change throughout force. They do not believe in democracy. They do not believe in tolerance. They do not believe in actual co-living. They are open for cooperation with whoever to secure their presence and to attain power. And this is again the whole logic. So we must come to a sort of common understanding and definitions required to get to that phase. That's number one. Number two, like in money laundering, you know, many steps have been taken and adopted on the international arena to stop that laundering. Now, an equal sort of arrangement should take place as far as financing the factions that deal and promote terrorism. Number three.
What if members or countries of the West support and finance those militant factions that we have?
They do finance them. It comes throughout the following. These organizations do form themselves in nucleuses, and these nucleuses might not be big.
Yes.
But they operate in a sphere in which they try to sell themselves. Like you see, all right, we are, for instance, if they work in a religious center or so forth, well, look, we are good people. We are only religious. We try to promote religious conduct and to fight against corruption and so on and so on. And that we are being fooled because of that and because we oppose such a government. The fact is that nucleus works in an atmosphere where there are many followers coming from all parts of the world that, for instance, know quite a little about the real dogma, the real thinking, the real history of that faction. I'm pointing to the Brotherhood. At the same time...
It's not just the Brotherhood.
Well, anyways, at the same time, they try, because they do not know all the dimensions and all these complications, they try to convince them that, well, they need help, and that please help us, and and this reflects on the others. And then they go to the House of Commons, for instance, and talk to some parliamentarian that we represent opposition and we're not permitted, we are not recognized.
We're not allowed to voice
We are
our
not
opinion.
allowed to exactly.
We're not allowed to participate in politics.
Okay. But how about the real facts related to their presence, to their history, to their performance? They do not know enough about that. So I think coming to common understandings about the definitions is important. Basically, if any faction promotes throughout its dogma violence or finds excuses that it has to resort to violence or that its dogma in itself can generate circles that recruit people around ideas promoting non-existence, violence, that should be very defined. Now, the sources, especially the money sources, here should certainly be cut, restricted. I compared that to money laundering.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm going to cut your discussion here. We have with us our other guest that has managed to join us. With us is His Excellency Ambassador Hazem Abu Shanab, who is a leading member of Fatah movement. He will be joining us, and maybe we can move the discussion to the situation in Syria and the Palestinian territories, because it seems whenever we try to make a progress on that front, something has to come up and hurl the progress. We'll be right back after this, so please stay with us.